Ah, charming Estonia, a far-off northern realm of mist and pine, known to few yet as old as the sea, a nation built by song, beginning as a hum, a low steady chant rising from the rowers of a longship, their voices keeping pace with the heartbeat of the sea. It grew into a creed, a hymn offered to a heavenly father on the eve of battle. In the fullness of time, forged through tragedy, it became a choir, the voice of a people who sang for their freedom. Hand in hand, their hopes echoing throughout the land. This is how a country smaller than West Virginia stood up to the largest country on Earth, with their voices alone. So welcome yourself in, scholar. This is the prime guide to Estonian history. First, some geographical context. As you can see here, Estonia is a northern European country, just south of the Nordic giant Finland and just west of the largest country on Earth, Russia. Estonia is most well known for preserving its ancient medieval capital city, Tallinn. But without further ado, let's begin the video. Sharing a similar story to the rest of Northern Europe, Estonia's story begins at the end of the last ice age, roughly 13,000 years ago, when the glaciers retreated and those saber-tooths were getting outmatched by the new long-tooths. The Puli settlement is the oldest found in the country, dating back to 9000 BC. Agriculture showed up a couple thousand years after that. From there, the people inhabiting Estonia followed the homework of the rest of the world, on through the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age. Archaeological and linguistic evidence suggests this group spread across these regions shown in blue, shaping its early cultural identity long before the Viking Age. Unfortunately, whatever these guys had going on before definitely did not weather the Viking Age. Estonia's coastlines, dotted with river mouths and trade routes, made perfect targets for Viking raids. The northern and western shores came under near constant attack and subjugation. By the 7th century, that tension created a cultural divide. Inland communities remained more traditional, while coastal regions began adopting the seafaring warrior lifestyle of the Viking neighbors. However, this did not mean they did not contest foreign Vikings. Quite the opposite. The Saga of Vercelians describes Vikings originating from Estonia's island Saaremaa. In 1187, these same Vercelians launched a raid on Sweden's largest city at the time, Sigtuna. The raid was so bad that everyone moved to Stockholm, and it sparked centuries-old blood feuds. Estonians went from victims of the Viking Age to that of Viking legend and folklore. Raiders, traders, and warriors of the same Baltic Sea that once carried the winds of their enemies. Oh Jesus, would you look at the time? It's 1193 and Europe is getting pretty medieval. Everyone's got the new game patch, including little Estonia. Shiny new armor, fancy crossbows, and castles. The most important part of the patch was being spread by the Catholic Church, removing that pesky mortal sin everyone got stuck with at birth. When they got to Estonia, she declined, opting to keep the forest fairies and stone trolls. Therefore, Pope Celestine III began a little-known northern crusade to convert the last remaining pagan population in Europe. German crusaders launched a series of raids into Estonia from their stronghold in Riga. Estonians were just too outmatched in every capacity and would be pushed back to the northern shores. The Kingdom of Denmark would then soon enter the fight, launching an amphibious assault on the northern region. While crusading through the province of Ravellina, the Danes would find a nice hill overlooking a natural harbor. Perfect place for that new castle technology. The indigenous Estonians began to refer to this place as Tani-Liina, meaning Danish castle. Eventually, it was shortened to Tallinn. This site would host the infamous Battle of Lindesnes, the Estonians' last stand against the Crusaders. Fighting was immensely costly to both sides, however the Danes would ultimately be victorious. According to Danish legend, during the chaos, a red flag with a white cross, the Danebrog, fell from the heavens straight into the hands of the Archbishop of Lud that gave him the morale boost to win. The Danebrog went on to become the national flag of Denmark. After a few more battles, the entirety of Estonia would be conquered and Christianized. The Danes would sell the conquered land to those German guys who had conquered the south, who were now reorganized into the Teutonic Order. These territories would now be run by the German elites and nobility, the native Estonians their serfs, forced to work the land. The Teutonic Order would be the ones who build a majority of the castles you can visit in Estonia today. Time would press on, and little Estonia was divided and ruled by one empire to the next. The Middle Ages are quite complex and hard to explain all in one setting. I mean, we're talking about a time when the Holy Roman Empire existed, and maps look more like blob charts that you see in a psych ward. So we have arrived at the 1500s. The Duchy of Estonia and the rest of the Baltics have been incorporated into the Swedish Empire. They are pretty pretty chill to the Estonians, giving them a high degree of autonomy and established universities across the Baltic, such as the famous one in Tartu. But it was not to last, as there was a big dog staring across the river, and his name was Peter the Great of Russia. He desperately wanted a seaport to expand the Russian Empire, but was comically boxed in by his neighbors, specifically Sweden, who controlled the entire Baltic. Thus, the big dogs were going out to fight, and the first battle would be none other than the twin fortress city at Narva. The first engagements would be completely lopsided, as Russian conscripts would be up against the fortified veteran Swedes. In that typical just run at them Russian tradition, they suffered horrific casualties time and again. However, Peter knew the Swedish Empire was stretched thin, and if he could make gains, however small, the Swedish would not have the manpower to take it back. The Great Northern War would be long and costly, but Russia would eventually push Sweden out of the Baltic. Our dear Estonia would now be ceded to Russia in 1710. Much like under the Swedes, Estonia maintained a decent level of autonomy under the Russian Empire. And by autonomy, I mean they reinstated the German nobility and it was back to serfdom, i.e. you work the same 5 acres of land in total squalor until you die, near slavery. This was clearly suboptimal living, particularly when other countries were starting to get privy to this whole democracy thing. Estonia, rather, the Russian Empire, was one of the last European countries to abolish serfdom. Consequently, around the same time, France was lobbing off the heads of their entire nobility. Guess they didn't want them to get any ideas. This era is typically referred to as the Great Awakening, as individual identity and freedom became popular among the populace. This movement would awaken Estonian identity, as the 1850s would be filled with national dialogue through weekly newspapers and homegrown Estonian authors. In 1890, the Russian government would become increasingly frustrated with the Baltic region, so the Tsarist government launched the first Russification campaign into the Baltics, a method of forced cultural assimilation as leadership would be reshuffled, the Estonian language banned, and discriminatory treatment. Opposition meant a one-way trip to Siberia. Well, Russia was going to get hit with some karma on the onset of war. Europe had just undergone an industrial revolution, complete with new types of weapons, and everyone was giddy to try them out on each other. Did I say Europe industrialized? I forgot to mention, Russia didn't. This is one of the key reasons many historians point out why Russia performed so poorly during the First World War. In a few short years, millions of Russians would be dead, primarily from neglect, as Russia did not have the tools or logistics to fight an industrial war. They lost so poorly, in fact, the country imploded, ejecting most of their western territories, including Estonia. Finally, after some 700 years of foreign occupation, Estonia would be free to govern herself. Oh great, they're back again, and with a new flag no less. Only a year had passed when the Soviet Red Army invaded. The Estonians, after finally tasting a brief freedom, would be forced underneath the waves for another 700 years. If Estonia truly wanted to be free, it would have to fight for its independence. Men signed up in droves to fight back the Reds, including volunteers from Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and Latvia, with direct naval support from the United Kingdom. Now, if you've been paying attention, where do you think the Red Army would attack from? In November 1918, the Soviet 6th Red Rifle Division would begin fighting by slamming through the fortress city of Narva. The Estonian defenders were caught off guard and horribly outnumbered, but Tallinn mustered a counterattack. The Soviet Reds advanced 70 miles into Estonia and started going backwards. Where have I seen that one before? Little Estonia, horribly outnumbered but highly motivated, expelled every Red Army force by the end of the same year. Their allies were so impressed, they started to receive some fun donations. The boys were getting armored trains for Christmas. The Estonian army would push out in all directions. In the south, they would help Latvia recapture their capital. In the north, the Estonians would meet up with the Russian White Forces and push towards Petrograd. Estonia was now performing amphibious landings and massive encirclements on Russian homeland. I have to emphasize, a country that existed for less than a year with no war experience, less than 500,000 people, and looks like a peanut on the world map, was performing the most complex and difficult offensive strategies possible on the biggest country on Earth. At great cost to the Soviets, the Estonians would keep their independence. During the interwar period, Estonia would draft its first constitution and set up parliament. A lot of focus was then poured into reviving Estonian culture, specifically bringing back its dying language. Unfortunately, Russia was still sour about getting beaten so hard by a tiny country, So, 20 years later, they came back. This time, they were far more organized and far better equipped. Fearing the cities would be reduced to ash by Soviet bombers, Estonia surrendered in 1940, but the worst was yet to come. In 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, capturing all of Estonia in the process. At first, some Estonians believed the Germans had come to free them from Soviet control, but that illusion shattered quickly. The Nazis did what Nazis do, bringing terror, forced labor, and mass executions. An estimated 10,000 Estonian Jews were killed during the occupation. When Nazi Germany was finally defeated, it came with an unimaginable cost. Half of Estonia's industry was destroyed, and 1/5 of its population was gone. But the Soviets didn't leave. Instead, they tightened their grip. Yet again, a new campaign of Russification followed, pushing to erase the Estonian language, identity, and culture. Yet, not all control is absolute. In Tallinn, there were small cracks in the Iron Curtain. Across the narrow Gulf of Finland, Estonian television sets could pick up Finnish broadcasts, giving the people a rare window into the free world, and a glimpse of what life could be beyond the Soviet propaganda. By the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union began to waver, those sparks of awareness turned into something powerful. Mass demonstrations erupted across the Baltic states. Not with weapons, but with song. Defying Soviet authority, Estonians gathered by the tens of thousands to sing and band patriotic hymns. These peaceful protests would later be remembered as the Singing Revolution. The movement reached its crescendo on August 23, 1989, with the Baltic Way, a human chain stretching 419 miles across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, linking over 2 million people hand in hand. On the 8th of May, 1990, the Republic of Estonia was named and declared independent. After some paperwork shuffle, Russia would accept their independence on August 20th, which is a national holiday in Estonia, and thus we have finally reached the modern age. Post-independence, Estonia went through a decade of rebuilding its economy and re-establishing itself in the world. It rapidly shifted its entire economy from a command market to an open market within a decade. Not easily done. Once the country's engines started going, they turned to the crumbling infrastructure. Notably, the rebuilding of Tallinn Old Town was given urgency, as it was well known to hold exceptionally well-preserved medieval structures. UNESCO and private donations pooled into the reconstruction efforts. It certainly paid off. By 2004, Estonia had firmly anchored itself to the west, joining both the European Union and NATO. And with that, I would like to close out today's video. If you truly did find this content enjoyable, it would mean the world if you'd give me a like and some feedback down below. There will be more videos to come. Thank you kindly.